I am Andrew Rudd. I am a filmmaker who had a film that showed at Salute Your Shorts a few years ago. And so they've been inviting alumni from their festival to come and ask filmmakers questions in lieu of having an audience talk back. So I'm going to try to channel all the energy of every audience that I've ever seen and ask you the kinds of questions that they want to hear.
Cool.
Some people may be watching us before they watch the film, but I think most of them will come and watch this video after they've watched your film and they want to find out a little bit more about you. So
Great.
We'll try to keep spoilers contained if that
Yeah.
matters to you. So I really had just a delightful time from the very first minute that I was watching your film until the very end. Like there's a special moment at the end that had this like personal resonance that just kind of caught me off guard. But one of the things I admired so much in the first shot is how you just hold the shot and the viewers just asked to try to puzzle our way into your world. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of what made you decide to start where you started with this storytelling?
Yeah, it's interesting. The start of the film was a bit different in the script.
Mm-hmm.
But when we recce'd the location, we realized we had this kind of quite interesting potential shot, which is this kind of aerial shot, which was sort of shot from a high kind of level of the school down onto the main kind of cafeteria type area. And when we got the shot, it just seemed to kind of have some kind of quality that felt sort of interesting. And so we kind of changed things around a bit in the edit and decided to go with that as the starting shot. And while we were editing, we just kept kind of extending it. And I think it runs to like 30 seconds or something like that now, but it seemed to work. Yeah, I guess in general, we were trying to as well use camera work that was like fairly static for a lot of the time to see what kind of drama and intrigue we could create within very still frames. And that was partly inspired by this film Elephant, this Gus Van Sant film, which is a kind of high school movie, but quite a dark one. And then also the work of this Swedish director called Roy Andersson, who's brilliant, and all of his films are pretty much locked off static tripod shots. So we were kind of channeling those two directors. Two
of my favorites.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, and actually I didn't think about Elephant as I watched your film, but now that you mention it, like it also is filmed with this light, but like the visuals are very kind of light and luscious and beautiful. And the story is and that's something that it has in common with, I mean, you have some real dark
Thank you.
But yeah, it was beautiful. And I also definitely see the Roy Andersson connection. Like that brings me to The World, because as you know, with Roy Andersson, like he makes these meticulously crafted worlds. But I did feel a lot like, I mean, I assume that you couldn't build everything from scratch. Can you tell me a little bit about the locations that you used and how they all sort of came together and what you did to make them have such a coherence?
Right, yeah. It was, thank you very much. That's really great to hear, because we really put in a lot of effort in that regard. We sort of wanted to do a high school movie, I guess, that had a slightly more like muted color palette, as opposed to what you might typically imagine a high school movie might have. You know, the classic 90s, 80s high school movies are quite kind of highly saturated and colorful, and we kind of wanted to do the opposite and suck all the color out. And so we kind of honed in on this kind of teal blue color as our sort of accent color. It's a kind of slightly melancholy color, I guess. And we really spent ages finding that school that had that color palette. So I ended up actually going on like a Wikipedia page for like London schools and opening literally hundreds and wrecking them on the internet. And then we went and physically viewed about 10. So it was quite an arduous process to really find that one that had the right color scheme and felt a little bit unusual and a bit cinematic in some way, and didn't feel like lots of the other schools that you often see in terms of British schools on film, which can fall into the trap of feeling a little bit kind of low stakes and parochial, as opposed to the American high school films, which always tend to feel quite cinematic and you have these gorgeous fluorescent lit corridors and all that sort of thing. So we were kind of going for that as well. And then we just kind of, wherever possible, tried to thread that color through all the other scenes. So just as an example, like the squash courts, typically in a squash courts, of course, you have red stripes that kind of adorn the walls, and we sort of changed that to tealy blue. And then in the background of quite a lot of the scenes, there's a kind of tealy blue stripe that we just put along the wall, which you might not... In the shower, exactly, yeah. Yeah. So it was just kind of like quite minimalistic choices, I guess, because obviously we were working on a really tight budget and just trying to do whatever we could to create unity between all these disparate locations, because there are obviously quite a few in this film for a short film. Yeah, and then finally, like, in terms of the grade, we had this idea to, again, just suck out as much color as we could without it feeling, without losing a kind of artistry, but just trying to make it feel quite muted. And so we basically desaturated and lowered the contrast for every shot and added a kind of bluey wash. And yeah, so all of that kind of came together to hopefully give it something of a coherent aesthetic. So that's great, you thought that.
I definitely thought that. I'm curious, in terms of your process, like, do the visual dimensions of your world sort of appear to you early on? Is it character driven? The tone, which obviously has a lot of surreal feel to it, like which of those things sort of drive you forward as you're composing the story and creating the story?
Yeah, it's a tricky question. I think generally it tends to be, I'll just have a kind of single image. So it's not really, I want to tell a story about this theme or this character, or I have a kind of storyline in mind. It's generally a single image that for whatever reason just really kind of grips me and I keep thinking about and coming back to. And in this case, it was this idea of this kind of a cappella club who were a bit kind of weird and creepy and had this kind of killer almost kind of capacity. And it was literally just that idea, and I just got really interested in the idea of like a dark a cappella movie, I guess. And then from there it was more kind of a process of just putting in the time to flesh out a story and that sort of thing. But yeah, it's normally a kind of some image that for whatever reason just speaks to me, and it's quite hard to articulate why.
Love that. That's a process that's really different than mine, but
yeah.
I love your film so much that
Oh, thank you, that's so lovely to hear. No, it's quite I guess, yeah, everyone has a different process, don't they? It's all, and I think none is invalid as long as it kind of gets you somewhere.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about, like, in terms of the time that it took to create. I know that usually in the audience people want to know some things about, like, the actual production, the shooting. How long did it take to shoot? How long were you pre-producing? I know that you've had a couple of short films before, so you're probably down to a science.
No, I mean, this was really it was really difficult and long and took a while. So I must have come up with the idea in 2015 or something like that, and then I was working as a music video commercial director, but always had this idea of this a cappella short in the back of my mind and kept coming back to it and working on it whenever I could. And then we eventually shot it in 2017, I think, at the end of 2017, or 2018, I can't remember. And then did over 4 days. So it was 4 days of principal photography, and then edited it for quite a while, and then did a pickup shoot to get a couple more shots to just fill in the story. Right. So yeah, it was a long process. It must have taken 2 or 3 years overall. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun, but it was also quite, I mean, by the end I was like, God damn, this film has to end. But yeah.
Right. And congratulations, you won an award at Sundance, which is,
thank you so much,
a game changer probably for any filmmaker's career, and for your sense of what's next. Like, how has that been for you? I mean, I know it's unfortunate that it happens this year during COVID-19 and quarantine, but I'm curious in hearing about, like, the journey since that moment.
Yeah, no, I mean, we just feel so lucky to have been given that award. And you know, it was just genuinely so unexpected. We didn't even sort of know we were nominated. Actually, we went to the awards event and we didn't even know, like, because we sort of assumed we weren't because no one had told us. But I think basically it turns out every Sundance short was nominated. So anyway, we literally weren't expecting it, and so it was quite kind of like scary to like go up on stage and like try and come up with something on the spot. But since then, it's been really helpful. I think it's obviously, it gives the film a bit of a profile, which is really nice. And I feel just really lucky that we kind of snuck in before all of these other festivals, you know, got cancelled or went online. So I feel really grateful that we managed to have that experience. And now we're just kind of trying to, you know, capitalize on that noise as much as we can by sort of trying to make features. Me and my co-writer are working on a couple of features at the moment. So we spent lockdown doing a lot of writing, basically.
Great. That was my next question. What can we expect in terms of the features? Are they similar in tone to this film? Something completely different?
Yeah, so one of them is actually a feature-length version of this film. So we're working on that, and I've actually just finished the first draft, like literally today. So,
that's a big deal.
Yeah, which feels like a milestone. I mean, it's still absolutely rubbish, but it feels like a good milestone because it's taken since Sundance to kind of write it. And yeah, we're working on a company with that here in the UK, and then another feature with another company that's a bit more of a kind of social thriller horror story. It's basically about a film. It's about a horror film shoot that gets sort of haunted. It's kind of horror film set on a film set, if that makes sense.
Right.
I need to work on the logline for that one. But yeah.
One of the things that I loved while watching your film was that there are so many moments that feel familiar to the viewer, like you're intentionally using visual tropes that kind of resonate with us, but then you'll sort of twist them in ways that we don't expect, or you'll layer on another. And is that, I want to know how much of that happens during the writing process, how much of that happens during the actual production process. Is it iterative? Does it keep on going for you?
Yeah, that's really interesting. No, that's definitely true. With this film, of course, because it's a kind of high school film, I guess the viewer just has so much expectation about what to expect from that kind of film. And I guess that feels to me to be quite a nice creative limitation, because you kind of have a set of tropes that exist that you want to in some way sort of acknowledge, but in another way try and subvert or twist in an unusual way. And so it kind of, it's quite good for kind of a creative process, because it allows you to, it gives you some kind of parameters, which is really helpful. And I think during the filming, I think I remember thinking, oh God, this is like, some of the stuff we're shooting feels quite cliched. And of course but I remember my composer was sort of doing the music for it, and I was kind of worried about certain elements that felt like so tropey. Just, you know, for example, the girl who gets like shoulder barged to the floor or whatever in the opening scene when she's walking down the hallway, which is just like a classic, you know, moment in any high school film. But I think, the thing to remember is like, which I kind of came around to, was because we had this core idea that was a bit dark and unusual of this a cappella club who, you know, effectively attack people, that would kind of inoculate you from, and it means that you almost have to then hit those more kind of cliched beats, otherwise the film isn't grounded in anything or something. I don't know. Yeah, as you can tell, I'm still kind of working it all out and I don't really know the answer, but but yeah, I think writing in a specific genre is quite creatively helpful, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
And it was only a positive thing, that those trophy moments, they never sort of stopped. They sort of always went to another place, or because they were layered with things that I didn't expect, they were delightful.
Oh, that's great.
I'm curious if that phrase that the high school principal uses on her, which I've never heard before, but I laughed out loud Both times he said it. My mother always says that a problem buried.
Buried, a problem halved. Yeah.
Is that really a common phrase that is from Great Britain that I don't know about, or did you make it
No.
up?
Yeah, no, full credit to my co-writer Jess. She came up with that line, and it was just perfect. We were just trying to create this headmaster who was just incompetent and a bit mad, and basically always sided with the bullies, and we just were going for this, you know, like you've alluded to, this tone that was slightly off kilter and unusual and it's quite heightened, and she came up with that line, and it just seemed to really hit the spot for that scene in that moment.
I felt like half the people I know live their life as if that were their motto. They're constantly like, avoid, let's bury that quick.
Yeah.
And so in that way, I mean, like that's one of the wonderful things about the film is that every single moment which sort of you convert to humor has all these layers of like actual real life tension and meaning that like shape our lives in not necessarily great ways.
Oh, great. That's so lovely. Thank you. That's really nice to hear. That was the intention, I guess. We're glad we pulled it off.
You made it happen. So have you gotten to hear from audiences? I know that that's one of the things that at festivals, usually you get to hear right after the films, and there's a little less of that going on right now, but what are you hearing from audiences? What seems to really be resonating with people? Maybe that you didn't expect or that you did, that you wanted to happen?
Yeah, it's always obviously just so fun to see your own film in a cinema full of people, and just hearing them react to it is so yeah, it's just so fun. And I think you often as well, yeah, I seem to remember sort of, you know, people responding to different bits in different parts of the world and all that sort of thing, which is quite interesting. But yeah, and then also people kind of, it's really interesting to see people bringing their own experience to it in a way that, you know, obviously I didn't kind of foresee at all, and people saying, oh, it really spoke to me for, you know, I was bullied, or this, you know, is like something in my life, or I was in an a cappella club, and I wasn't in an a cappella club personally, so I don't know what it's like, but yeah, it's always just really fun, I guess, to hear people bring their own experience to it. That's always interesting.
So I'll tell you I told you that I had a thing that happened at the very end. So
Oh yeah.
Spoiler alert, this isn't really a spoiler alert, but if you haven't watched the film, you should stop, go back and watch the film and listen to the rest of it. So so the moment when the a cappella club suddenly is wearing these pale blue suits and ties instead of what they've been wearing for the rest of it. So when I was a child, I was in a fundamentalist Baptist family singing group.
Oh, wow.
And we wore those suits.
No way.
Isn't that bizarre?
Oh, God.
Crazy thing.
That's crazy. Wow.
But that did make me sort of like think more about this sort of whole like matching clothes culture. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I know that like there are times where a filmmaker doesn't need to come up with a backstory for things, but I am curious. Like, do you have you thought about like why does the a cappella club have on that special outfit for that moment? And
yeah, for that, I mean, it was just a case of I guess it was, you know, the big kind of attack scene of the film and the kind of climax, and so we wanted to give them a slightly different aesthetic just to kind of delineate that. But yeah, I mean, in terms of costume generally, we also opted for this, I guess, somewhat surreal thing of having our squash players always wearing squash outfits, you know, at all times. And weirdly, I mean, again, when we were making it, I was like, I think this is a good idea, but maybe it's a terrible idea and it will be really jarring. And it's so funny when you finally get into the edit and you sort of realize that certain things you really thought were going to be a really big deal are actually not a big deal at all. And actually the problems are actually things you just like totally didn't foresee. And then you're stuck for months trying to sort them out. But that was interesting. That was just a great learning experience for me. And yeah, that was, I'm glad it kind of worked in the end in terms of the costumes in that element.
That when I did see the idea that the squash club is always wearing squash club clothes, I mean, I couldn't help but think back to my own high school days, which were many, many years ago. and I think it's a pretty common practice here in the United States, at least I don't know, for athletes on game days that they get to wear their uniform to class.
Right.
Which always felt to me like, I mean, I played soccer, so I did it sometimes, but I always thought it was kind of weird.
Yeah.
Like elevated in this particular way.
Yeah, it is super weird. It is super weird. Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, my school was fairly, there wasn't this like tribal aspect, which is something people sometimes ask about. But I just kind of, I think, liked the idea of really exaggerating the kind of tribalism that we recognize from the classic high school films, and just kind of really doubling down and trying to go really like almost sort of West Side Story in the way that we were framing these two warring groups.
That's actually a great allusion to West Side Story, because there's other things film that also match. Great. Well, thank you so much for taking this time and talking to me, Dylan. Like, I can't wait to watch your feature films when they come out.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
I'll be telling everybody to make sure that they see this film, because
please do. Thank you. That's lovely to hear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Congratulations again on finishing that draft of the screenplay. That's a great.
Thank you. I'm going to go have a beer.
That's right. I'll have a beer to celebrate you.
Yeah, please do.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Amazing. Lovely to meet you.
You too. All right. See ya.